everyone. I'm Ed Mullins, and with me is Maki Haberfeld, Dr. Maki Haberfeld from John Jay College. Today we want to continue talking, or actually start talking, about what New York City has been facing, what the nation has been facing, and ultimately the impact it's had to the world overall, and that's the COVID-19 virus. Maki, it's been a couple of weeks since this has hit the city of New York. We've both had some time to look at the impact that it's had. And what I'm curious is what your thoughts are as to, was New York City prepared? And I ask that question in light of the fact that New York City remains the number one target for terrorism in the United States. And although COVID-19 has not been listed as terrorism, I would think the response to a pandemic should be included in the sense of protecting its people. What are your thoughts?
Absolutely. I've been teaching a counterterrorism course that I designed for NYPD shortly after 9/11. And one of the topics that we discuss is what will happen in the city in case of a biochemical attack. So biochemical attack in terms of consequences is exactly the same as the virus that we're facing. Of course, biochemical attack could be even more serious. And when I teach this course, I go back 200 years to Lisbon, Portugal, when they had an earthquake, and a great preparedness plan for this earthquake, maybe not ahead of time, but in terms of leadership. Within a year, the city was better than it was before because they handled it properly. And the first thing that I would always say to the cops when I enter the class is, okay, let's pretend that we have a biochemical attack now, as we are sitting here at John Jay College. What do you do? And they all look at me with disbelief, like if I had three heads. And I said, listen, we have to be prepared for this. It happened. And what do you do?
And you're asking that question.
I'm asking my NYPD students.
Okay,
my
gotcha.
NYPD students.
Great.
And they say to me, well, I guess we report to our command. I said, you guess that you report to your command. What if the command is not there? What if everybody in your command is dead? And this is how we start talking about this. And so I've been studying the lack of preparedness on the part of various city agencies for a major disaster for almost 18 years now. And I am flabbergasted how this lack of preparedness continues. And even now, when politicians talk about this, I don't think they're even going the right direction.
What I've seen is, and I totally agree with you, like, I've been through both attacks on the World Trade Center. I worked September 11th. I've been part of the NYPD for a very long time. I've seen what we have done to rebuild counterterrorism in the NYPD from where it was many years ago to a more proactive type position today. We have seen numerous events, Times Square, New Year's Eve, Thanksgiving Day parades, St. Patrick's Day parades, all these types of events, and we always hear the police commissioner. I remember Bill Bratton, Commissioner O'Neill. We have no credible threats. And this is what we would identify as, being prepared. What we've never heard when something happened is, well, we did have a credible threat. So the truth of the matter is that phrase of no credible threats has no meaning. But knowing that we have been the target, knowing that we are constantly prepared, my concern was a biochemical attack. And it's been talked about. It's been talked about for many, many years. But then this happens. COVID-19 hits. We open with the mayor basically telling people it's not going to be a big deal. Go out, enjoy yourselves, walk the street, go to Chinatown, have dinner. No preparedness at all. He waited almost 2 weeks to close the schools and kept thousands and thousands of kids in the school system. Our public transportation system still running. I mean, if you want to talk about a virus running through your blood veins, it's definitely in the public transportation system. But what I find most disturbing of all of this is that 35,000 NYPD officers had no equipment, had no real training for something like this. And we went almost 2 weeks without getting access to supplies. And our sick report went to somewhere between 22 and 25%. We've had numerous people pass away, numerous people seriously sick. Where's the accountability for this? Who's accountable? Does it go back to, and I'm going to start with Commissioner Bratton, because what we found out with this is Commissioner Kelly, under Mayor Bloomberg, had a plan. He had an emergency plan, and this mayor did away with it. So we had Bratton, we had O'Neill, we had a pandemic, and thousands of people in the city of New York died.
I think it definitely starts with the mayor, because the mayor is responsible for the appointment of the commissioner, and it's always clearly broadcasted to everybody. I am the chief law enforcement officer as a mayor, right? Not necessarily just this mayor. The mayors always talk about this. I am in charge. I am in charge. But at the same time, I would like to say that the commissioners have a little bit of a discretion in terms of internal structures and create some sort of a response that's not necessarily it doesn't necessarily require an approval of the mayor. I mean, there should be some structural response for the boroughs, for the precincts, for the commands. So yes, Commissioner Kelly did have a plan. I am not necessarily sure that this was a great one, but this is how we start, right? There are enough places from around the world that we could learn from best practices, how to create this contingency planning, how to create emergency response for, again, you're saying we have COVID, and it's not a terrorist attack, it's not a biochemical attack, but you know what? We don't know.
Well, we don't know.
know.
And we're starting to hear some rumors
We don't know.
that this may not have been just an accident. I mean, it's, we're hearing it came out of the city of Wuhan, it's been kept within the city. China shut their local airports to not spread throughout China. This infected the world. So we don't really know. We see the economies have tanked throughout the globe. China, they thrive. Interestingly, is all the equipment we need to survive the masks and vaccines and all this stuff are all made in China. So they have an economic benefit to this. And it'll be interesting as to what the real outcome is going to be.
Yeah, but also in terms of predicting that something bad of this magnitude will happen, this was out there, right? We have the leader of North Korea threatening to deploy missiles of mass, ballistic missiles, intercontinental ballistic missiles. Yeah, I mean, this is an individual who doesn't have full control of, his desires, and at any moment, we could have a missile from North Korea landing in New York City, or in Hawaii for that matter, but, so it's not just China and the viruses that they experiment with, and, I am very concerned about how it happened there, and you're correct. They immediately sealed the city of millions of people, so they knew that there is something very serious. I mean, you don't seal a city of millions of people immediately the way they did. So, whether it's a conspiracy theory or not, we did have a real threat from North Korea. There are other leaders of the world that are looking at weapons of mass destruction, and of course, New York City, as you said, primary target here. Why not to prepare for this? With all the computers that we have, the softwares, this could have been a tabletop exercise with the use of software. You didn't have to close the city. You didn't have to do simulations. You could do the simulation on the computer. And you could make sure, to have the PPs, to know what would police officers need in case of biochemical attack. Would they need gas masks? No, but they would need regular masks. Would they need other protective gear? Yes. Some of them might be dead. Some of them might be sick. What do we do? Maybe the retired cops could be the next plan, right? Maybe if we have 20% of the cops sick,
Reinforcements.
bring the retired cops, the ones who retired in the last year, the ones who retired recently. You don't bring, people who retired 20 years ago. Yeah, but you bring every year. I don't know how many cops retire every year, but I assume it can go in hundreds, if not more.
More of our members are retired than who are actually working. So we have thousands of law enforcement.
So you can have a plan. You can ask them ahead of time, will you be ready, Right. In Israel, for example, there is an entire support force that is composed of individuals who long retired from the military, but they're still under the age of 60-something, 63 or 64, and they support both the police forces and the military constantly. But of course, during a national crisis, you make use of them even more. Right. So people say, well, we have National Guard. It's not the same. Right. It's not the same. You can so this is such a simple plan. Have a list of people who retired, mobilize them.
Commissioner Kelly did something like that. He did, and there is a list, but it's not being utilized. And, one of the things that I found disturbing is when I would speak with the hierarchy of the NYPD is they would constantly say, this is something new. We're learning, we're all working, we're all learning, and every day things are changing. And although that's true, you're supposed to have been prepared for this ahead of time.
But I don't know if it's new, Ed.
The template should be the same from a biochemical attack to a response
to a virus,
emergency, right? To whatever the emergency,
to a tornado, to
anything,
right. That generates the same results.
There's no reason in the world why our doctors and our nurses do not have the equipment needed to save people. If we have no doctors, then why are we even going to hospitals?
There is no reason also not to have collaboration from the states. Now Governor Cuomo wants to have collaboration from 7 states about reopening. Why didn't you have a contingency plan before if you can shift medical personnel from one state to another to supplement the ones who need to work 12, 15 hours?
See, that's the problem. Like, I personally think there should be hearings, but the hearings always turn into be nothing more than, TV airtime. Nothing gets accomplished. They form some kind of committee. They write this 17-inch report, and it gets put on a shelf someplace. And at the end of the day, we're 18, 19, almost 20 years past 9/11, and what did we learn?
Nothing.
Same
in law enforcement. We don't have. If you don't want to bring the retired, so you should have an agreement. We have 600 police forces in the state of New York, 600, right? Have some sort of an agreement. If you are down 20% of your workforce, you'll bring police officers, from a different city, from Albany, for example, because having the state police is not the same because they're not
used to
They have
a different function, but they have a different
enforcement.
Right. They do.
So you have to bring from cities, from a city to a city, right? From a state.
Just the idea of using, if we utilize our retirees to backfill, they could handle the administrative jobs because they already know the job. They know the radio signals. They know how things work. You can bring them. A retired sergeant from 2 years ago can still operate the desk.
Even
today.
from 10 years ago.
Absolutely.
These are skills that not perishable skills.
Right.
These are skills that people have in their
blood.
blood.
The law, the system.
They know people.
Right.
If you bring even people from the last 5 years, you could easily replace the ones who are sick, and they know the people who they work with, right?
Right.
So this is just such a simple.
The problem that I see is the general public expects us, the NYPD, law enforcement throughout the country, to protect them. They expect that. They go to bed every night believing that everything's in place until something happens and we realize, that's not in place. And then the people in charge don't want to talk about this the way you and I are talking about it. They want to say, no, we did a good job, we handled it, I'm very proud, and all these other things. But, you have to have the accountability for it. If we hold everybody accountable at the lower levels, then we should be holding them accountable at the higher levels. Now, we heard the governor asking for, I think, 40,000 ventilators.
Yeah.
The mayor sold something like 5,000 or 6,000 ventilators. Maybe it was more than that back in 2016, 2017, somewhere like that. So you're asking for these things. You've closed hospitals. You've sold ventilators. Like, how do you get away with this? And people are dying.
If you were to ask me, about one quality of a leader, right? There are many qualities of a leader, but one quality, it's accountability. You have to be accountable for whatever mistakes you made, right? So you made a mistake. We all make mistakes.
Everybody makes mistakes.
Everybody, right? But the easiest way to make up for making this mistake is to acknowledge it and to look for a different solution. And this is, you will find a politician dead before you're going to find a politician accountable.
Right, they won't admit to it.
They won't admit to it.
And there's so many bright people that if you circle yourself with smart people, you get different solutions. You realize that other agencies, other governments, other nations, dealt with these problems in different ways. Absolutely. So you learn from other places.
And there, just you look at the web, there are already so many different ideas there from various law enforcement organizations, whether it's ICP, International Association of Chiefs of Police, or other local and state police agencies that are putting out there a lot of information for police officers, what can be done, what needs to be done. Why not to have somebody also as part of the preparedness plan to collect all this information, to vet all this information, to make it applicable for NYPD, right? Not everything is applicable.
Well, we don't spend the time training with it, so all the information that gets collected doesn't get put into training. Our training, you'll see a video, they'll run you through some classes, but it's not like we're getting military type training where you're actually going through it on a daily basis. And, if you ask, well, why not? It costs money. We shoot at the range twice a year.
Yeah, I know. But
and you think about it, you're carrying a gun, you shoot twice a year. Why did we not have mass for the last 18 years attached to our belt? Most police officers never fired a weapon. If I never used the mask, what was the big deal?
Nothing. It costs 10 cents, right? 10 cents.
Why not have a bag and every
gloves, masks,
right?
Have it.
And some of it has a shelf life that just goes beyond. I mean, we bought some stuff for our own members that is unlimited shelf life. So everyone's issued it. It's part of your equipment. This is stuff that's a no-brainer that we didn't do.
Again, this is part of leadership of an organization. Take care of your employees. Take care of your employees, right? Provide them with whatever they need in their daily interactions with the public, and provide them whatever they might need if something happens, right? Whether it's biochemical attack, whether it's a virus, whether it's any type of situation that their health will be compromised because of the nature of interactions. So everybody's talking about, again, we talked about this before, about mental health now for doctors and nurses. Nobody's talking about, again, mental health for police officers. So we are moving in the direction of recognizing that people have PTSD, but police officers are sort of on the back burner. Sometimes it's mentioned in a peripheral way. But again, this is something that, going back to who is responsible for this, leadership of police organizations, not just NYPD, in general.
Well, in general, there should be a collective, right? There should be a collective. With the biggest thing, and if for the people that watch this, the biggest message is to the general public. Because if you're not taking care of the police, the EMS workers, the firefighters that are out there, if they don't have the proper training, the proper equipment, they cannot help you. They just cannot do it. And isn't that what we're supposed to be doing? Aren't we supposed to have all the up-to-date equipment to get there to help you if you're trapped on a 15th floor, or if you have a heart attack and something's going wrong, to have all the necessary tools to do that? But if we start to collapse, then there's no one to respond. And to me, that's just a no-brainer.
And you know what? When I walk the streets of Manhattan now, I see people misbehaving, to put it mildly. And people are driving through red lights, right? Just a small example. People are yelling at other people. Just, I guess they cooked up in their apartment, they go out and they try to find a victim out there. If we won't have police presence out there because we won't have enough healthy police officers, this would be a much bigger problem than the virus at the end of the day. Right. And, talking about stockpiles for equipment that stockpiles that was depleted during previous epidemics and not replenished. Who was responsible for this? I mean, it is.
I think they cut
President
the
Trump
budgets, though,
is right when he says it's the state, right?
Right.
It's the governors of the states and the mayors of the cities. And again, I think that New York City, in that sense, is an island in itself, that you have more responsibilities than any other city.
But they also New York City gets huge dollars in federal funding. Huge
amount.
And, we have an FBI headquarters located a block from here. I mean, we have lots of federal support in this city. Although this city doesn't play well on the other end with federal law enforcement. And we've seen that with the whole ICE agents. I
said it first after 9/11 when they started appointing various people as heads of Homeland Security, for example, who never had any law enforcement experience. And I said, I understand politics, like you said, much less than you do. But I do understand that sometimes you need to appoint somebody who is not necessarily the competent person to head an organization. But to me, when it comes to people's lives, you have to leave the politics aside. You have to appoint the competent people who have the knowledge, people who will make sure that whatever is needed is there.
So
we don't do that.
Basically, if that's true, and I do agree with you, the mayor should not be appointing his wife to run this awareness program, this mental health program for all the people who've been exposed to COVID.
I think that people who are responsible for other people's lives, whether it's mental health or physical health, should be people who work in this field, who are recognized experts in this field,
right.
who have the credentials. Right. You cannot appoint your wives, your siblings, your brother, your mother, your children to positions that required skills
that they don't
and
have.
Knowledge, right. Credentialed knowledge.
Right.
It's not just, I have the knowledge. I also make comments about things that I don't have the knowledge, but I'm not in charge of these things. Right. I'm entitled to my own opinion. Right? Like Governor Cuomo says, these are the facts and this is my opinion. Okay, so this is my opinion. But I do know that as a college professor, that not everybody can teach every topic and every course. You have to bring people with expertise to teach others how to do things properly. Otherwise, you basically involved in a fraud. You are delivering content that you have no credentials for. How can you appoint people who have no credentials in charge of other people's health? And again, health. It's one thing to appoint somebody to be in charge of some charity or be ambassador to Switzerland. Okay. You want to appoint your brother to be ambassador in Switzerland? Go ahead. Worst come to worst, we want to have good relationship with Switzerland. Right. But you cannot appoint people with no credentials and make them in charge and have them in charge of people's health or law enforcement agencies, right? It's like,
they need to understand.
To me, the first, appointing I think it was the former governor of Georgia to be the head of the Homeland Security when it was created. Zero law enforcement background, in charge of a new law enforcement agency.
Oh, yeah, it was Tom Ridge, Pennsylvania.
Yeah, right? I mean, so this is similar. Law enforcement, mental health, physical health, building bridges. Can you imagine appointing somebody who is not an engineer in charge of infrastructure?
Right.
Why it should be different for this current problem that we have? It should not. Bring the best of the best. We have the most credentialed universities and schools in the world in this country. Right? Bring people from MIT. Bring people from Harvard.
Brilliant minds. Brilliant minds.
Brilliant.
Some people that are just in schools today are creating programs that we will see hundreds of years from now taking shape because it was started with a single thought.
But this is leadership. When you look World War II, when you look at Churchill, and you look even when you look at they were surrounding themselves with people with credentials.
Brilliant people, right.
Here, the same United States, we had people working on various secretive missions who were credentialed, not because they were cousins or brothers or siblings. So this is how I started from the beginning. Why don't we learn from horrible crises that we had in the past, right? Whether it's World War II, World War I, how leaders behaved. But again,
I don't think people spend any time studying leadership either. There's a whole variety of ways that leaders are, grown, built, made, and you take a little bit from each person, you form your own style. But I don't think we don't teach it unless you sign up for that course.
Well, listen, that's why I've been pushing for leadership training for law enforcement from the academy. And one of also the leadership skills that we talk about when we teach leadership in my program, you have to identify problems based on the past and project for the future. This is part of being a leader, not just dealing with present, what's happening right now. Let me deal with what's happening right now. Project for the future. So we had a number of epidemics in the recent years, right, in New York City. SARS, other.
You had 5 in the last 18 years.
Yeah,
right?
5. Again, going back to criminal negligence. You know that things happen. You know you were not prepared. You're not doing anything about it. What is this in not criminal negligence? Somebody has to be found accountable. The state of Missouri, I don't know. One of the states is suing China, right, for the damages of releasing this virus.
Yeah, it might be Missouri.
Missouri.
Yeah.
Okay. We'll see how much money they're going to get from China. But you know what? This is something that we should be looking at. Who is going to be accountable for this lack of preparedness let on the knowledge that we had, based on the knowledge that if there was a pandemic a few years ago, there'll be another pandemic.
I think we got finger pointing going on. We have local governments blaming the president. The president is taking the hits for
United States of America, right? Not one.
Everybody's
United
responsible
States.
for their own little fight. I'm responsible to secure my house. You're responsible to secure your house. Yeah. Each mayor, each local county leader, they all have responsibilities. And the way I see it, right now, they all have to answer the one question: why were you not prepared? And because we were not prepared.
Yeah, and they're all pushing prepared. They're pushing the federal government, the city or the state on. It's not about blaming somebody because you don't want to admit that you are
that I sold 5,000 ventilators, that I closed 4, 5, 6 hospitals. I mean, you're asking for hospitals. We're sending up the Javits Center. We're asking for the comfort ship to come in. But you've closed hospitals.
Yeah, but it's a function, again, of surrounding yourself with incompetent people. If you're building a government, again, now I'm speaking from my personal opinion, but also studying leadership for decades. You have to surround yourself with people with knowledge.
Right.
Knowledge.
And not be intimidated with the fact that they're smarter than you.
Knowledge, yes.
Right.
Yes. And again, be intimidated, when you're looking at the mirror, say to yourself, I'm not intimidated, right. But outside.
A good leader won't be intimidated, though.
The good leader will say, okay, I have my strengths in this. That's why I'm a leader, right? That's one leadership quality. I was elected. Right. Obviously, I have something there.
I can win elections.
Yeah, but this is just step one. Right. How do you build government? Do you build government because you know somebody? Okay, if I know you and at the same time you have the credentials, perfect match, right? I know you're a good person, you also have the credentials. But just because I know you and you have no knowledge, I'm sorry, as I said before, you'll be the ambassador to Switzerland, but you're not going to be in charge of mental health, or not going to be in charge of preparedness, overall preparedness. And
let me ask you this: there's two areas I want to go is New York City subways right now. They're, I'm going to say, infested with homeless people all over the place. We have more people that go through our subway system in a single year than all of TSA gets throughout the year. So we have people lying on benches, using them as bathrooms, bringing in trash, and yet everyday workers need to get back and forth. They use the subways. We have no plan for homeless people in New York City. I believe they went to the subway as a place to get off the streets, and they could ride that train all day long for the next 2-3 weeks. What do we do with the homeless? What do we do?
Again, the previous mayor had the solution. Giuliani had a solution. Right now, we live in paradise for homeless people. The subways are an encampment for the homeless people. Putting empathy aside, right? Putting empathy aside, society needs to function. It cannot function if certain elements of the society are not taken care of. You have to take care of the homeless, not by just telling them you're welcome. That's not good enough. Sure. That's not good enough. Right. If you don't create structures, say you're not welcome. You'll be welcome when I have the capacity to put you in housing, to make sure that you're taking your meds, whoever needs to take meds. Maybe it's mission impossible, but I think that under current administration, we became sort of safe haven for homeless people. I walk the streets of New York to work, back and forth on every corner. I mean, not now, but usually on every corner. There are encampments of homeless people, and I've been in New York for many, many years, and it was never as bad as it is now. And it's bad for them, and it's bad for us. It's bad for New York. And again, the creation of various task forces and
that's all political.
That's all. Yes, I created the task force. Right. Here's the report, as you mentioned, on 2,000 pages. This is the steps that we're going to do. I always say, you know what? Any report that has more than 10 bullets, I don't want to read. Give me 10 steps. What are you going to do? A
lot of the political fluff is we form a committee, we do a report, we name a task force a different name than what existed 5 years ago, and in the end, we don't correct the problem. And you really have to look at it like, peeling back an onion skin. You got to get to the core of the problem, and you're not going to solve it 100%, but you can improve a solution. And I don't think throwing money at it's just not the answer either. In Hawaii, the local police set up storefronts where they can have homeless people walk in and be treated for infection, get shots, sometimes they have a pain, they give them Tylenol. And while they're there, they get interviewed for a job. They get interviewed for, you're looking for shelter. What it did is it got people productive, and it lowered hospital costs in this one area by $50,000 a month. So, it's really a brilliant program that, we should try to duplicate to some degree here, because what happens here is we're just moving them from one block to the next, into the subway, from out of the subway, and nothing's really taking place. And this mayor is just not doing it.
Something is taking place. The deterioration of the quality of life in New York City.
Right.
So
True.
It is. It is taking place. It's also, from my perspective, looking at law enforcement, it sends the wrong message to the cops. Don't, look the other way. Don't, you have just one homeless reach out unit, but
the truth is we're not dealing with the homeless situation. We're not. When you hear we're sending the police out, the police are the answer to everything. You got a leak in your house, call the cops. Yeah. You get robbed, you call the cops. But this is the political answer to everything that happens. When you look, and you just said we're breaking down society. Yeah. We're now, and we have been, releasing criminals from the jails because of the virus, and we just had a woman that was raped by a criminal that was released. And this is all Mayor de Blasio's plan. And, what do you expect the police to do when we arrest you and you go back? And I can't stress enough that the people of the city need to get up and start screaming, because that's what's going to prevent this from happening.
The people in the city, unfortunately, again, I think, based on how they vote and overall very, very liberal approach to everything, feel that we have some sort of, unjust criminal justice system, and everybody who is behind bars does not belong behind bars.
Until they become victims.
And even then,
when those liberals become victims,
they have some sort of an explanation. They were victimized by the system, so now they're taking it out.
You can
always find a good excuse if you strongly believe in something, but this belief is based on misinformation or lack of proper information. Crime is something that we will always have in various degrees, right? So what do we do with this? So Scandinavian countries have one way of dealing with crime. We have another. We have the largest population of incarcerated individuals around in any democratic society. Granted, some of them don't belong behind bars, but you cannot just release people, because there's an epidemic.
Right.
Yes, people who are about to be released in 2 weeks or 3 weeks, 4
Makes
weeks.
sense.
Okay,
Right.
makes sense.
Makes sense.
But this is where you have to stop, because among other things, incarceration is a deterrent. Individual deterrent, general deterrent. You open the gates.
That being said, if we're releasing criminals to the streets, basically we're turning the streets into prisons. But it's okay to release criminals who go out and commit rapes and robberies and burglaries. Just last night, 2 nights ago, we had a funeral in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, in a Hasidic community. And the mayor wanted enforcement of the 6-foot rule and all the social distancing in this community. It ultimately caused major news headlines. He himself got involved, and I'm going to say targeted this particular community that they should not have been doing this type of funeral. Now, I'm curious your thoughts on it, but this has been a practice for as long as I've been a citizen of this city and born onto this earth in the Hasidic community. And I understand some summonses were written. So we go from releasing rapists to enforcement of a non-law on a public street to people who are at a funeral, people of religious faith that are at a funeral. What's going on there?
Okay, so actually I'm very glad you asked me about this, because I want to take us back again to what I mentioned before, Lisbon, Portugal in 18th century. So there was an earthquake. This was their major disaster then, like 100,000 people died, and back then 18th century, this was tremendous disaster. And so one of the things is, what do you do with the dead? Well, what do you do with the dead? How do you bury 100,000 people in Lisbon? Maki de Pombal, who was in charge, and I always bow to him because to me he's the father of contingency planning and preparedness, he decided we'll bury them in the sea. And of course, at that time, the religious figure said, you cannot do that. You cannot do that. And what we could have learned from this, that preparedness, contingency planning must include discussion with leaders of various religions. What will happen in a case of a disaster, of a pandemic, if we have funerals? What do we do? Do we throw people into the ocean, to the river? Do we allow for funerals? We have to have an agreement ahead of time so we can respond from the law enforcement standpoint accordingly, right? So of course we didn't have it. We have the NCOs and we have all this community policing, philosophies. Everybody's talking to everybody, but you don't have a plan for a critical incident like this. So from this, we have to learn. We have to have, as part of NCO initiative, as part of community policing relation initiative, sit with the leaders of the city, religious leaders, whether Jewish, Orthodox Jews, Catholics, Muslims, and decide, what if we have a huge number of bodies to bury? How do we modify the current funeral traditions, procedures? Give back and forth. If normally we have 100,000 people descending on the funeral of some major rabbi or other religious leader, can we agree that will be only 10,000 or 1,000? And normally if we walk throughout the streets of Brooklyn, can we contain it to 2 streets? All these things can be very easily identified, agreed upon, and planned. So, the commissioner talked about this yesterday. It's not going to happen again. What are you going to do? Are you going to arrest thousands of Hasidic Jews?
That's not going to happen.
Not going to happen.
Not going to
right?
happen, and nor should it happen.
And think about all this, at least perceived gains that were made by the NCOs, by the community policing
Well, it
officers.
contradicts it.
You throw it out the window.
Totally
Everything that
contradicts
you've
it.
done
Right.
over the last few years, trying to create good trust, good community relations, trust, respect, you throw it out the window overnight. And this is something you're not going to be able to rebuild because these people, many of them are young people, they will remember it for years to come. Not just with this commissioner, the next commissioner, here's the NYPD trying to break the funeral, arresting us for attending the funeral. As you mentioned, this is not a law. We don't live under a martial law here.
Nope.
So what are you arresting me for?
Public place, walking on the street.
So prior to the pandemic, we had this constant sort of rebuttal of the public when there was an arrest. Why are you arresting me for? There's no probable cause. Okay, no probable cause. People knew that much. Now they will know why you're arresting me for. Forget the probable cause. There's no law. There's no violation. There's no violation. I know that, the mayor thinks that he has the authority to enact various restrictions, and so does the governor and the president.
They cannot supersede the Constitution of the United States. I know this mayor doesn't believe there is a Constitution of the United States, but they cannot supersede the Constitution. And, for the members of the civic community, I understand the 6-foot distance and social distance. I get all of it. I get the concern. But for the mayor to say, we want to keep the public safe, we don't want the police to get injured and all this stuff, this guy is the number one person that gets the police injured. So that's not an excuse. At the end of the day, churches were closed for Easter Sunday. We have people of faith that are trying to do a funeral, and there are no provisions for it. And, contrary to whether you're obstructing traffic or I get all of that, but there were barriers, there were face masks were being worn. Why object that night when you didn't object to the Blue Angels flying over the city and hundreds and thousands of people throughout the city were getting together to watch? Why not object when you were in the park and taking a walk with your wife and you see everybody together? You didn't object then.
And you don't even know if whoever is walking with you is your wife, your husband. I mean, people walking together, what are you going to do? Send the police officer? Please show me your marriage certificate? Right. Or do you live together?
And you don't have to. You and I could walk out of here right now, continue this conversation on a corner, and have the right to be there to speak. I understand the pandemic. I get that we need to protect each other. But at the end of the day, the leaders, the law enforcement leaders, and the public officials cannot authorize arrest that violate the Constitution.
And if they do, they're going to destroy police-community relations for years to come,
Absolutely.
For decades to come, so we can close all the NCO initiatives and any community policing initiatives.
Totally agree. Well, Maki, again, another great show, but what I'd like to do is next week, you brought something up earlier on about teaching the students in John Jay, NYPD students, what do you do if there were a biochemical attack right now? I think we should talk about that in our next behind-the-scenes show here and getting it all out so that people can learn, cops can learn, the general public can learn, and if anything, maybe we can get some dialogue going and get other people to talk about it. So once again, thank you. Thank you for watching. Follow us on Inside Blue 360. Thank you.